The following is a special presentation of the Red Stick Business Report. Watch future episodes on Soul of the South or contact your local cable provider.
Hi, welcome to the Red Stick Business Report show. This 30-minute show is designed to introduce you to some of Baton Rouge's most exciting business and community leaders. The information that we provide on this show is not to impress you, but really to impress upon you that you too can make a difference in this community and in this world. So let's get to this week's show. I'm excited to have our guest, the president of Southern University, Dr. Raul Mason. But I want to also say what else he is. He's a father, he's a husband, and a lot of people don't realize he's an entertainer, he's a rapper, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. Dr. Mason, great to have you on.
Howard, happy to be here. And that's president of the Southern University system, just to
Correct.
get the record straight, right?
Yes, make sure we clarify that, as you may want to define that early on. The Southern University system, what's the difference between that and Southern University Baton Rouge?
Well, Southern University Baton Rouge is one school within the system. We're the only historically black college and university system in America. And we have a community college in Shreveport, a four-year school in New Orleans. Our flagship is Southern Baton Rouge, but we also have a law school and an agricultural research and extension center. When you put all of those together, that's the Southern University system, which is unique in the world.
That it is. I'll tell you what, we're going to dive back a little bit to your early years, you know, having grown up in New Orleans where Southern University was originally founded. You know, talk a little bit about your early years and some of the experiences you had in New Orleans in the 50s.
Well, sure. I am either third or fourth generation New Orleans. I happened to be in Los Angeles because my father was working out there at the time when I was born. But we came back when I was 3 months old to New Orleans because he said his mother was dying. And then, of course, she didn't pass away until 30 years later. So I grew up in New Orleans. Didn't have a lot of money coming up. There were 6 of us. My father delivered mail, but he spent all of his money putting us through Catholic school. So we did get a good education. I went to a Holy Family nun school, St. Catherine, which is now the location. It's set on the location of the Tulane Medical Center on Tulane Avenue. And I went there through 6th grade, and then they moved us over to the white school down the street, which was St. Joseph's. And I went there 1 year, and then went to Jesuit High School. I was the first African American in their 8th grade class, their pre-freshman class.
Talk a little bit about that experience of being the first African American. You really integrated Jesuit High, I would say.
Yeah, I wasn't the first one to go there, but I was the first one in the so-called special 8th grade class to get into that. And there were about 10 of us at the time. Probably the person people would know most that got there before me was Dookie Chase, the son of the guy that started the restaurant. And it was, socially, it was not very good for me because I had come from really a poor background, didn't really know any white folks. I was probably the only kid in the school that caught the bus to school, you know, that kind of thing. So I didn't really know how to I was a very shy person, right? So socially, it wasn't great, and after my first year, I actually wanted to transfer to St. Aug, which was the all-black school. My father wouldn't let me, though, because he wanted me to go to St. Aug, and I just didn't do it. And he told me at the time, he said, "Son, make your decision, but once you make it, you're going to have to live with it." And that was a lesson I learned from him because he made me live with it. Loved the education. But socially, it made me a lot tougher, although I didn't make a lot of friends in high school.
You know, as you got ready to leave high school and leave New Orleans, and from New Orleans to New York, you know, talk about making that decision and something that might help a student that's sitting on that fence today of leaving home and exploring greater horizons.
Well, that's another interesting story because it wasn't a big grand plan. Let me see if I can condense it for you.
Well, sometimes the lessons, we don't realize them until after we've gone through.
Until after you've gone through them. Well, that's true. I was actually planning to go to Xavier University, right? I had never heard of Columbia and hadn't even I had never been outside of Louisiana my whole life, right? And this recruiter came from Columbia University. I didn't want to go to the interview because we had a championship intramural game that it was lunchtime, right? The counselor made me go. I kind of rushed through it, went down back to the intramural game. We were losing 6-0. I was the free safety on the team, so I intercepted the ball. That's a true story. Intercepted the ball. We went down and scored, and then time was out, but we had to do the extra point. I noticed something in the defense, and I called a play for myself and caught the touchdown to win the game, right? But caught the extra point. But here's the moral of the story. After the game, all of my teammates were congratulating everybody else, but nobody was congratulating me. And I was just sort of standing there by myself, and the guy from Columbia was looking out the window.
Wow.
And we kind of connected after that, and we became very good friends, and he's the one that talked me into going to Columbia, and that was my first time on an airplane. And so it changed my life. It really did.
So, you know, when you look back at that, we talk about that lesson. Talk a little bit about those Columbia years and being in the big city.
Yeah, it was a good time to be in New York. I was there from 1970 to 74 undergrad, and you know, 74 to 77 as a graduate student. It really was a great time because I came right after all of the student unrest and riots and everything else.
Right.
You know, and right before the sort of gentrification of the 80s, right?
Right.
So it was a funky kind of time. You didn't need a whole lot of money. I had 1 or 2 pairs of jeans, you know, and I wore them for about 50 years.
Down in the village.
Down in the village, yeah, and walking everywhere we wanted to go, and you know, just visiting people. And I had my girlfriend, who was my first wife, was at Vassar, so I caught that train, you know, back and forth a lot. It was a good time, probably the best years of my life, to be honest with you. And then getting a Columbia degree, both undergrad and law, has proven to be a benefit as well, because people notice that Ivy League thing going on. Yeah.
You know, if you have to give advice to students today leaving to go away from home, what advice would you give them?
You know, that was my first time on a airplane, and it never crossed my mind not to take the adventure, you know? I mean, it was either stay home or go do something I hadn't done before.
Right.
I got on a plane. I remember seeing my mother in the window at the airport crying, you know? I never looked back, man. It was just a wonderful time, and I loved every bit about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm learning a lot about Dr. Mason, and when we come back to the next segment, I'm sure we're going to learn some things that are not in writing about Dr. Mason. So stay tuned for the next episode of the Red Stick Business Report Show.
Holy Ghost Church.
Yep. Welcome back to the Red Stick Business Report. I'm your host, Howard White, and today we're on set with Dr. Raul Mason, the president of the Southern University System. I wanted to make sure I get that in. You know, Southern University is the only historically black college system in this country. Now, Dr. Mason, we talked a little bit about your experience in Columbia and New York in your early years. Tell us what happened after you decided to leave Columbia University.
Well, sure. Even though I was in Columbia Law School and on a track to probably work with a firm, while I was there, I met a guy named Reverend Alvin McKnight. Father McKnight was a priest who was working with poor people in the South, organizing co-ops with a company called Southern Cooperative Development Fund. So he asked me to come and work with him for $17,500 a year. I remember negotiating the salary. And you know, I spent the next 5 years organizing and financing low-income cooperatives and businesses all across the South. So I got to meet all of these great grassroots folks, a lot of civil rights people from the civil rights days, and it really did shape, you know, the way I saw the world after that, and the work that I did after that.
You know, if you had to take one lesson that you learned from that job, what would be that key lesson? Probably a ton of lessons.
No, I could tell you one key one that stuck with me the rest of my life. It was the idea that the Bible is really a book of economics, and that what it talks about is the way to distribute resources in an equitable way, so that you know, it brought God into my work to fight for justice, you know, in a way that you know, I learned then, but I've been doing ever since then.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that really strikes me, here you are, Ivy League trained lawyer, come back down south to give back really with that salary versus what you could have had at a firm. Talk about those career choices and advice you would give a student that's leaving college
Well, I would say first, follow your heart, because you know, if you happy with what you do, then the rest really does take care of itself. I've never had a career. I don't know if this is good advice for everybody, right? But I've never had a career plan. I've always just sort of walked the road as it presented itself in front of me. So I wanted to go work with McKnight. I did that. Working with McKnight led directly to me going to Tulane, because one of the people on his company board ended up being the president of Tulane. Right. Working at Tulane ended up putting me in the middle of public housing in New Orleans. Working in public housing in combination with Tulane prepared me to go to Jackson State. My work at Jackson State allowed me to get the call from Southern, and you know, I'm hoping this is the last stop on the road. But time will even tell with that. You know, time will even tell with that.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that experience in New Orleans at Tulane. I know you were one of the first African Americans at that level at Tulane, as well as those experiences and integrating a lot of collaborative efforts with the HBCUs in the marketplace.
Yeah, that was a good time at Tulane. I went there as the first in-house attorney. Okay. And by the time I left, people kept dying and moving on and things like that. So I ended up being senior vice president and general counsel. I ran all the business operations at Tulane. But while we were there, we made real efforts to bring more color to Tulane, because you know it's an uptown white institution, right, very elitist. I remember somewhere along the way I did something called Initiatives for the Race and Gender Enrichment of Tulane University, right? And it was such a feisty sort of experience. It actually made Newsweek and the front page of the Times-Picayune. But we had this real debate about, you know, an institution's responsibility to serve everybody and not just one segment of the population in the country. So it was a good time. We brought in a lot of black faculty, a lot of black students, a lot of black administrators, many of whom are still there today. And you know, I guess if I had to look back on it, now the other thing about Tulane though is that I was the first and last senior administration official who was an African American there.
Wow. There's a lot that can be read into that, and we won't go into that.
Take it where you want to go with it. Tulane is what it is.
That's right.
It's just that simple.
But no, talk about some of the experiences out in New Orleans housing.
Yeah, well, what happened there was that, you know, as senior vice president, I was trying to connect Tulane with the community around it. Right. Much of what was public housing units, right? So I went to the Department of Housing and Urban Development to try to get a little grant. And during the conversation, the Secretary of HUD, Henry Cisneros, walked in the room, right? And he said, I hear you want a little grant, but I have a better idea. And the idea that he had was to partner Tulane with the federal and city government to fix public housing in New Orleans, which was the worst public housing in the country at the time. So I became the world's first federal executive monitor, which meant that I was the board of directors of the housing authority responsible for making all the decisions and driving the process to fix it. It was a great experience, and you know, at the height of it, we had public housing people catching buses and vans to the campus at Tulane to take classes and courses and things like that. And we had Tulane students going out to public housing to do tutoring and community gardens and stuff like that. It really was a hell of an experience. And we even had our School of Social Work had a database of 100 families where we were tracking every intervention that we put in place to determine what worked and what didn't work, so that we could, you know, use that in the future. It was good stuff.
You know, when you look at that, you never know how many families you truly impact and how many future leaders you develop because of those experiences on both sides of the coins.
You really don't. And you know, one of the good things about having done this for 30 years is that every now and then somebody comes back and tells you, you know, Dr. Mason, in fact, there's a U.S. attorney today who was a black student at Tulane Law School that I mentored, and he came back years later and said, Dr. Mason, if you hadn't been there, I never would have finished law school and I wouldn't be a U.S. attorney today.
If you would, briefly talk about that move to Jackson State, real briefly. You know, we don't like to talk about Jackson State a lot, so we'll talk about that briefly. Well,
okay, just briefly, you know, I had, while at Tulane, the last 4 years I was there, I started something called the National Center for the Urban Community.
Okay.
And while I was there, I had to make a decision to stay as a senior vice president or do the center. I wanted to do the center. The new president wanted me to be senior vice president. I got the call from Jackson State, and 3 weeks later I was president.
Oh, wow. You know, and that's where I really got to know Raul Mason, was at Jackson State University, who's Southern University's most hated,
arch
and I use
rival.
that word, arch rival. Okay,
Yeah.
that's more politically correct. But the team that we dislike the most. When we come back, we're really going to talk about Southern University on the Red Stick Business Report show. So stay tuned for the next segment. Welcome back to the Red Stick Business Report show. I'm your host, Howard White, and today we're here with Dr. Raul Mason, the president of the Southern University System. Dr. Mason, we've covered all those years, and now we've talked about you up to Southern University. You know, let's talk a little bit about Southern University and some of the things that you're doing that are innovative for the system.
Yeah, let me segue from Jackson State and work to it, because it's important, I think. You know, we just had a football game with Jackson State, as you know, and we lost on the last play.
Well, it was a good game, not great because we were on the wrong side of the.
Right, but there's a story here, though.
Okay.
The team that beat us, I built that team, right?
Yep.
They were freshmen when I left, but the point is that we did everything we did with that team for one reason, and that was to beat Southern, right?
Everybody gives Southern their best.
Everybody gives Southern their best, because when Southern is at its best, Southern cannot be beat. Yeah. And history has proven that. So Southern, for a lot of reasons, is a very special place. Has been historically, and I think will be again in the very near future. We are remodeling Southern, for lack of a better way to put it, and rebuilding it on the traditions of the past, so that it will be a model 21st century learning institution. And the advantage that we have is that we are a system. Right. And all of higher education is trying to figure out how to deal with this new reality with less public money, having to be more customer friendly, you know, workforce sensitive. But because we have a community college, we have an urban institution, we have a flagship with graduate programs, and we even have an extension center that works with poor people all over the state. Right. When you connect the pieces and make it something greater than the sum of the parts, I think that Southern will be an example and a model not only for higher education in Louisiana, but I think nationally and even globally, people will start to look at us and say that's what we need to be doing.
Now, I look forward to that, because when you talk about globally, we were talking earlier about the program with Brazil. You guys went over to Turkey and just really talked about that whole international flavor. I was down in Guatemala, and I had someone to mention Southern University to me this summer. So just an exciting time internationally. Just touch on that a little bit and plans that
yeah, well, the world is very small and getting smaller every day. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're not global, you really are not a player at all, because nothing is local anymore. We have programs, as you mentioned, in Brazil, Central America, some in Africa, and you can see this growing over time. What we also have, though, is an online university that we're building now, right, as the only online HBCU brand in the market, right? And online can go anywhere, yeah, anytime. It's asynchronous. So when you put all of that together, and then the third piece that I think we have that is going to help us a lot, is the fact that we do have this really high-performing community college. Because while the world needs more and more bachelor's degrees, mm-hmm, we also need welders and electricians and medical technicians. And if we can provide the full scale of academic inventory, mm-hmm, whatever anybody needs, we can provide it at a high quality, then Southern's name will begin to grow and grow and grow, not only locally but nationally as well.
You know, and I think one of the key things with Southern University as we expand out is really not to forget our core mission. And one of the programs that's, I know, that's dear to your heart, the 5/5 agenda, is core to that. And that's taking underserved youth. And I want to clarify this from my perspective, is that those underserved youth, they're not dumb. They're intelligent individuals who have not had the opportunity to learn or be exposed to the same things that others may have.
Right.
And if you could explain that 5/5 agenda a little bit.
I can. Well, first thing, we don't call them underserved youths. We call them hidden stars.
Hidden stars.
Because,
I like that better.
well, because statistically, a certain percentage of the population are stars, right?
Right.
These are people that provide opportunities for other people. And if you're black and male in America, we're born with just as many stars as everybody else.
Right.
But because of this system that I call the wolf, we tend to lose more black male stars along the way than we should, right? Mm-hmm. And the wolf is basically the American business model where the founding fathers decided that they needed to put justice aside, and this is a quote from Thomas Jefferson,
right.
Put justice aside so they could create slavery. And they knew this, they knew what they were doing, and used slavery as a way to build this new nation.
Right.
Slavery became Jim Crow, where they purposely put black men in jail. Jim Crow became the war on drugs, where they're driving black men into jail and turning them into felons. And you can't vote, you can't get a job, you can't get public benefits. And it's the business model that's the problem. And what the 5/5 agenda does is it plays off the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And what we're saying is that we want to make America whole, get 5/5 by reclaiming and developing black male human capital. So we go out and we find these hidden stars, and they're there. They have to make less than a 19 on the ACT, and they have to be Pell Grant eligible. We had our first class at the Honorary Center, which is the pilot project in New Orleans. Last year, the second class started this year. And these kids that are not supposed to finish college,
right.
After the first year, we had about an 89% retention rate, and all of them are on track to finish in 5 years. It's a 5-year program. And we'll turn them into teachers, put them back into the K-12 system so that they can explain the wolf to young people who are being eaten by the wolf and produce more high-quality graduates who can become more teachers, and we'll recycle that until this cradle-to-prison pipeline is gone.
Well, you know, and you said that 89%, and I want to clarify a little something there because we had that conversation once before. The 89%, that 11% chose not to stay in the program because of the rigorous.
Yeah, well,
but they actually
all but one.
College.
All but one.
Okay.
One left college. Okay. Everybody else either stayed in the program or got out of the program because it was too rigorous, but they stayed in school.
Right.
And just so you know the whole story, one of the two that stayed in school now is asking to come back into the program. So we think we have something here, and it's the beginning of what I hope is a national movement to reclaim and develop, or to change this business model that's outdated in this country.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that anytime I get a chance to sit with the leaders such as yourself, I always love what I call my vision question. You know, how does Dr. Raul Mason want to be remembered? What's going to be your legacy?
At Southern or in life?
In life.
Well, my answer to the vision question is this. I'm a mechanic, right? Mm-hmm. And I could tell you a story about that, but I'm a mechanic. And it's not for me to have a vision, it's for me to understand the collective vision and make it happen. Okay. That's what I do. So if I do what I do and the people say they did it themselves, I'm happy.
Hey, you know, 30 minutes is never enough time. So as we wrap up this week of the Red Stick Business Report, I look forward to seeing you at the next episode of the Red Stick Business Report. Until then, God bless.